From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Okay. Good afternoon and welcome all to the African Middle East Division. I'm Mary Jane Deeb, Chief of the Division, and today I'm delighted to be able to welcome Maaza Mengiste, the writer whom you will be hearing about from Rob Casper in a minute. But today, the African section, in cooperation with the Poetry and Literature Center here at the library, which is headed by Rob Casper, and the Africa Society for the National Summit on Africa, whose president and CEO, Bernadette Paulo, will address you in a moment, will be presenting the 10th interview in the series Conversations with African Poets and Writers. This videotape series is meant to record for posterity the words and images of important African authors. In addition to their works, which the Library of Congress holds, teachers, scholars, students, and others interested in African culture will have a unique opportunity to view these authors speaking and reading from their works and speaking to interviewers. The point of the series is not only to have them here and to share them with you, but also to provide a tool, an educational tool, for people doing research on Africa and on literature in Africa, for students who want to learn more about the writings of the established older writers, and also the new ones, the young voices, the people who are coming with new ideas, who are speaking about the new Africa. And certainly the works of the writers that we present to you have been already, have received awards, have been recognized in their field, and as certainly as has Maaza Mengiste's new book. Fentahun Tirone, the area specialist for Ethiopia and Eritrea in the African Middle East Division, will introduce today's exciting new writer. He will introduce her and talk to her. Robert Casper is going to do the introduction, but he will be the one who's going to interview her. And Fentahun is really a pillar of Ethiopian studies here at the library. It is through him that we have acquired this wonderful collection that we have today. And it is he who brings so much of so many patrons here for events that have ranged from having the grandfather of the grandson of Haile Selassie come here to having programs on various aspects of Ethiopian society. So before we begin the program, we'll have Bernadette Paulo, the dynamic CEO of the Africa Society, and our partner in this initiative, who will say a few words. Bernadette?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests all. Thank you, Dr. Mary Jane Deeb and Dr. Robert Casper and Dr. Angel Baptiste and Eve Ferguson and our distinguished Ethiopian scholar. The African Society of the National Summit on Africa is so pleased to partner with the African section of the African and Middle East Division and the Poetry and Literature Center of the Library of Congress. You know, as this program continues, we're in our third season. I'm struck by not only what we've accomplished so far, but the potential impact this series can have in educating Americans and people throughout the world about poets and writers living on the continent, as well as highlighting the contributions of writers and poets in the African diaspora. And this really fits in our mission, the mission of the Africa Society, which is to educate Americans primarily, together with our partners, about the countries, cultures, economies, and contributions emanating from the continent of Africa. We tell a markedly different story from those conveyed in the media. And we're proud to actually have staff members, young staff members from Uganda, Kenya, Ghana, and Ethiopia. Beginning with Patricia Bain, our program director, and Sarah Caruso, and Leila Samara, and Kojo Hazel. Miss Samara, who's from Ethiopia, has told everyone on Facebook about you, Maaza Mengiste. I mean, she's taken such privilege. You would think that you're her sister, and so I have to acknowledge that. But on a more serious note, you know, Maaza's work is impacted by her life's experiences, which is why she writes in such a profound manner. It's refreshing to see someone who can turn what is tragic into literary masterpieces. That she was named a new literary idol by New York Magazine is a tribute to her, and it's an inspiration to potential authors who are encountering similar situations in places around the world, who can use their talent and energy and the past, no matter how turbulent, as a positive gateway to the future. We appreciate the participation of those of you who are attending this program at the library today, and we also welcome you, those of you who have the opportunity to view this program online in the future. Together, we are growing, we are experiencing new talent and traveling to different places through the eyes and experiences of our distinguished guests. Thank you very much, and now I have the pleasure of introducing to you Rob Casper, Dr. Rob Casper, who heads the Poetry and Literature Division of the Library of Congress. Mr. Casper.
Thank you, Bernadette. And thank you to Mary Jane Deeb for organizing this reading in series. I'm thrilled to work with the National Summit on Africa and the African and Middle Eastern Division at the Library of Congress and celebrate African writers and poets. I'm really excited that this is our 10th event, and excited for what we can bring going forward to American audiences. Writers both, as Bernadette said, writers both from the continent and diasporic writers as well. Before I introduce Maaza, our reader today, I want to tell you a little bit about the center. We are the home to the Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry, and we run some 30 to 40 programs like this one every year. To find out more about this series and other events like this at the Library of Congress, you can visit our website, www.loc.gov/poetry. You can also find out about the library's African and Middle Eastern Division at www.loc.gov/rr/Ahmed, AMED/. Finally, if you want to watch some of the videos that have been produced as part of this series, you can go to the library's homepage at www.loc.gov and click on webcasts. I should say that if you have cell phones, please ask that you turn them off, and also that there'll be a question and answer period at the end of this event, and if you participate in that question and answer period, you will give us permission to be able to use you on the webcast. Bernadette did a great job of introducing Maaza Mengiste, but let me say a little bit about her as well. First, I want to say that she's a terrific writer, but she's also a wonderful, wonderful person, and I'm personally thrilled to have her here today. She was born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and lived in Nigeria and Kenya before settling in the United States. Her debut novel, Beneath the Lion's Gaze, which is for sale right in the back there, was published by W.W. Norton and Company in 2010. It received great accolades. The Christian Science Monitor called the novel, quote, intelligent and moving, and added, quote, "Beneath the Lion's Gaze provides a window into a complex and ancient country." Well, the New Yorker described it as a, quote, "tender novel," and said Mengiste's social intelligence and historical research allow her to write compassionately about emotions denatured by a brutal regime or calcified by conviction. The novel was featured on a number of top lists for the year and was also selected by The Guardian as one of the 10 best contemporary African books. Maaza's work has also appeared in the New York Times, BBC Radio 4, Granta, and Lettres International, among other places. She is a Fulbright scholar who has received fellowships from the Emily Harvey Foundation, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, the Prague Summer Program, and YADA. A graduate of the Creative Writing Program at New York University, Maaza currently lives in New York City. Please join me in welcoming Maaza Mengiste.
It is really a pleasure to be here, and I've had the opportunity while getting lost outside and trying to find the library of bumping into a few Abishau who kindly directed me, and I see some faces that I saw outside. So thank you to Rob and everyone at the Library of Congress for inviting me. It really is a pleasure to be here and an honor. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my book before the Q&A and give you some context to the sections that I will be reading. My book is set during the early days of a revolution in Ethiopia that began in 1974. My novel goes through the first 3 years of that and includes probably the bloodiest era, the bloodiest years in that period, called the Red Terror. And my main characters are a family headed by a doctor who works at one of the bigger hospitals in Addis Ababa. And through them, I was interested in examining and investigating what happens to people who love each other in conflict, but suddenly realize that they have very different and opposing views of what should happen in their country. I think the family unit for me was very important because I'm interested in what happens when you are related to somebody and when you love someone, but you don't like their ideology. And so Hailu's family, my doctor in this, was really a perfect vehicle for me to do this. Within Hailu's family, he has 2 sons. Jonas, who is a university professor, who's very pragmatic, feels responsible for his wife and daughter, and only wants to survive this revolution. He wants to stay under the violence. He wants to stay away from it as much as possible. Dawit, who is the younger brother in here, is the one on the front lines. He's the one protesting. He is in an underground group trying to overthrow what would become a military dictatorship. And so with those 3 characters, I wanted to explore how each of them reacted not only to the possibility of change, but what happens when that idea of change goes very wrong and a new regime takes place and a very violent period begins in Ethiopia. But also in my book, which I think I will talk a little bit about later and perhaps in a Q&A, I have another character named Mickey. And Mickey was Dawit's best friend growing up, but Mickey was much poorer than Dawit was. And Mickey somehow finds himself involved in the military and slowly begins to rise in the regime. And you see through this friendship with Mickey and Dawit the way that politics can destroy a friendship, but also begin to destroy what they thought they knew about each other and about themselves. The part that I will read now, I think one of the things that I questioned as I was writing this book and researching was how was it possible? How did it start? How could it begin? And this revolution was called the Creeping Revolution. It just seemed to happen slowly, gradually, in steps. And at first, the Derg, the military regime, initially promised a bloodless revolution. It was a broken promise, but this is what they said. And I wondered, in those early days, what were people thinking? What were people imagining? And in particular, because I have one of my characters, as a kind of a side character, is Haile Selassie, the emperor, I wondered what he thought, as step by step, these military officers are getting closer and closer into the palace, and then into the palace, and then into his office, and slowly moving him further and further into jail, into prison, until they kill him. And so I want to read just a very quick section of just my own imaginings of what Haile Selassie might have been thinking in those early days. The emperor wasn't sure how these soldiers had crept into these meetings. Somehow they'd managed to crawl out of their barracks and into Menelik Palace, their distaste for educated and cultured men clear in their haughty glares. They had been meeting at the 4th Division headquarters when one day a few of their select had driven in their jeeps onto his grounds, pushed past his startled guards, and settled themselves around his table. He'd become confused by how many they were, these men in dark green fatigues who now cradled his elbow in palace meetings and whispered that he must remember their demands, he must remember his people. He no longer knew their numbers, didn't know which of these earnest soldiers had taken control of his radio station and breathed words into every home and restaurant in his city. They had said, "We do not believe in an eye for an eye. We will bring to trial all those who misuse their power. There can be justice without bloodshed." And was it only the wind, or had his people sent joyous shouts into the night sky? In the whirl and speed of so much happening so fast, the bodies of these men had disintegrated into mere voices in his ear that seemed molded out of the shadows that clung to dark corners of his palace, drifting in and out of his line of vision, leaving traces of smoke and the scent of burning wood in their wake. They talked to him in his sleep, their words nestling against his head and burrowing into his brain. The emperor slid through his days, shaking the noises loose from his ears, trying to bat the prodding requests away. "Let us help you lead the country. You are old and we are young. You are one, we are many. We will do everything you ask." The pressure built in Emperor Haile Selassie's head, drilling behind his eyes. Thoughts collapsed into 100 scattered words floating in front of his face, pinned onto pages that were shoved under his pen. He found himself numbed by the smiles that sliced his resistance more than their hard, sharp eyes. "Your name here." And here, these officers he'd never known before said, "Sign this and dissolve your ministry and the Crown Council. We have a new and better way for you to rule." They were men, simply men, instructing God's chosen, the monarch with blood that could be traced to wise King Solomon of the Bible. Soon the voices floated from the radio and called his best men to submit to the wishes of all and go to jail. "There will be no bloodshed," the radio said again, "only justice." His senators and judges, cabinet members and ministers, his noblemen began to leave their posts and walk with grim confidence to turn themselves in. "Sign here and here. No time to read. We must hurry. Trust us. Don't sit. There is no rest. We must show that change is coming. Don't you hear your people?" The emperor stood. The emperor walked. The emperor followed the backs of the uniformed men from one meeting into another. "What has become of us?" he asked himself. "When will angels lead us out of his fray?" Emperor Haile Selassie tried his best to become immobile, to stand rigid without following, to sit without signing, to watch without nodding, without expression, without revealing the panic that fluttered through him. But things kept moving forward. "We must not be anything other than what we are," he reminded himself. We are, and so we will be. We are here in these days of locusts and noise, but it has been written that this shall pass, and so it will. As the revolution is beginning and going and inflicting chaos and havoc into the lives of many Ethiopians across the country, my character Hailu, who is the medical doctor, has been introduced to a new patient in his hospital. And it is a special patient who's under the custody of the military. And he has been told that she is a special prisoner who's been very, very roughly and violently interrogated. He is to heal her so she can go back into custody. And Hailu, who has been trying to keep his son Dawit desperately out of the fray of the violence and the protests, finds himself confronted with the revolution and with choices that he never expected. He makes a decision in what to do with this young girl that lands him in prison, and he himself is then subjected to the same torture that she underwent. And I will read you just a brief section of a moment of Hailu in prison. This is fear. I know this taste of bile and sweat in my mouth. I have run against Italian bullets with this taste thickened on my tongue. I have raised a rifle and a scalpel and my hands with its familiar sting and stink. I am no stranger to this. This is fear, Hailu said, but it didn't ease the tightening in his throat. It didn't loosen the veins that swelled and throbbed from the pressure of a heart beating too fast. There is nothing here that is not the sum of its most minute parts. There is nothing here that logic and rational discourse cannot put back into place. But each breath seemed to shove him deeper into the jail, despite the fact that he hadn't moved from this solid chair in what felt like hours and maybe days. So Hailu started counting. And, hulat, sost, arat. He couldn't understand why the colonel would be so interested in a small, quiet girl who was fragile, much too fragile to live in these times. He would tell the colonel that she was brought to him already near dead. How do you expect me to keep a dying body alive? He'd ask. I'm nothing but a simple doctor, a mere man. Like you, he'd remind the colonel, we too are only men. It is God we need to question, to interrogate, to beg for answers. Hailu lifted his face to taste a fresh breeze. The cane is tall in my fields, so tall it blocks my vision, closes off the sun and curtains me in darkness. He didn't listen to the heavy door that shut behind him. He dug himself even deeper into the steadily increasing numbers instead. He searched his pockets for prayer beads he realized he'd forgotten at home. He took his granddaughter Tizita's hand. Count with me, Tizzy. Quit praying, a soldier ordered. He shoved him out of the small room into a long hallway, then into a wide reception area with fluorescent lights so bright not even sunlight could compete. The air was weightless and chilly. It burned his nose to inhale. The jail was cleaner than his hospital lobby. It held no smells. There were no noises. Soldiers were attached to chairs, hunched over documents that sat atop perfectly arranged desks, rigid as statues. Not one looked up to take in this latest prisoner, flanked by two of their stern-faced comrades. Hailu faltered for a moment, but a hand pushed him forward, and he heard inside the noiselessness that was making his head ache, tiny, telltale signs of life. The scratch of pen on paper, the deliberate thump of a stamp, the opening of a freshly oiled drawer, the slow hush of a chair pushing across a concrete floor. Sit, a voice ordered behind him. Hailu slumped into the metal chair pushed under him. The slant of light that pushed into the room from a strip of space in the curtains was crisp nearly bleached of all golden color. It settled on a soldier carefully thumbing through a stack of papers with a back as straight as a ruler. Hailu looked around him. Gone was his sugar-cane field. Tizita's hand had evaporated. The air bore down in all its coldness. He hugged his suitcase to his chest, begged his body to produce heat to replace the chill he already felt settling into his bones. The urge to run overtook him again, but the very order of things, the symmetry of motion and stillness in the dark gray office made even the thought of resistance illogical. Thank you.
Maaza, I want to congratulate you on your success on your first novel. I must tell you that when I was reading this novel, I was very emotional, page by page, because it reminded me of the turbulent, tragic times that of the 1970s, the mid-1970s, that me and my generation had to shoulder. So it's a pleasure to have you. And I also want to thank you that you attempted to piece together all the essential elements of the revolution in this one novel. Ever since I knew about the book and I found out about the publishing of the book, I was intending to get hold of you for a long time, and you know it has come to reality because of thanks to Robert Casper, and we're glad to have you here. So I have a few questions for you. The first question is, what inspired you to write such a historical political novel, and how did you do the research on the Ethiopian revolution?
So, I was, I came to the U.S. when I was very young, if you can tell from my English, and I had always wondered what brought me here. And what raised my curiosity was the fact that I would keep asking my family, and my family would not answer me. They didn't want to talk about this period. So I started looking back at the things that I did remember from the revolution. I was born just before that, but I was living in Ethiopia during the very early days of the upheaval. And I had only a child's memory of what happened. But, and for me, they seem very much like photographs. You see an image, but I didn't know what was happening before that. I didn't know what happened afterwards. I just had this picture, and I didn't know the political context. But I remember playing outside, and we would hear gunshots that would come, or sitting inside the house because we couldn't go outside anymore, and seeing, I would see the light, when bullets are being shot, they have this light that goes into the night, and I could see some of it sometimes. Soldiers broke into our house, and that was when I knew that I think we were hiding somebody, even though my parents didn't tell me at that time. But instead of asking the adults, they would come and ask me. And I was 3, but they didn't think a 3-year-old could lie. But I think that's what makes me a writer. So, and so I remembered those things, but no one would tell me about them. And when I came here to the U.S., I wanted to know how I got here. Why am I here? Why am I not back home? And so I was looking for as much information as I could find on Ethiopia. But you have to remember this, for me, I was 8, 9, 10, 11 at that time, and I couldn't find many things for my age. So I started reading children's books about World War II, and I started reading books about revolutions in other countries, books written by Chinese about the Cultural Revolution, anything I could find that could try to explain to me what might have happened in Ethiopia. And that interest stayed with me, that idea that I wasn't just reading or looking about myself, but in stories that I was finding about Libya, about Nicaragua, Guatemala, Argentina, I was seeing children who were like me, and I was looking at, and finding people like my parents and my aunts and my uncles. So I kept reading, but as I got older, I still had this story in my head, and listening at dinner tables, at parties, at weddings, when we all get together, I started paying attention to the stories that are being told, and not only listening to the stories, but listening to the silences in those stories, the moments when a story cuts off, and you know there's more, but they skip 5-6 years and they continue the story, or they won't tell you what happened in the middle, they just stops. So I was listening to those moments and realizing that I think there's something here, I think there's something more. And I wasn't sure that I was the right person to tell this story because I've grown up here. But there was a moment when I was living in Los Angeles, and I was looking in the Sunday newspaper, and it was the 25th anniversary of the fall of the military junta in Argentina. And the journalist in that newspaper had done a wonderful report, but he included not just the historical aspect of the dirty wars, but he included pictures of mothers holding their photographs of children who were disappeared or who had died. And they showed photographs of classmates from a high school, and there were small numbers on those people who had survived and those who did not. And looking at that, I said, you know, maybe I can tell the human side of the story. Maybe I can tell about the people that I know, even if I don't fully know yet the historical, the complicated historical reasons. I know from my family and from my memories, I know what happened to people. I know what happened to my own family. And this journalist gave me an inspiration to talk about the mothers, talk about the sons, talk about the children, because those women in Argentina who were holding up the pictures of their disappeared were the mothers in Ethiopia doing the same thing, were the fathers also. And that gave me an inspiration to write.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's a long answer.
In your novel, you have used an extensive metaphorical language and imagery and symbolisms. One of the symbols that you used is the line. And what does the line signify in your novel? And if you would like to include with your answer why you divided your novel into 4 sections or 4 books.
Yeah. Okay. The second question is really one of the best questions I've ever had. No one has asked me this before, and I really had to think. I know why I did it, but it's the first time I have to speak my answer.
Well,
Let me start with the easy one, the first one. So the lion in my book, the imagery, which is also part of the title here, is in reference to Haile Selassie in one way. The conquering lion of Judah is what he was called. And so beneath the lion's gaze, I had this image of the emperor watching everything unfold in his city. But also, many of the events in my book take place around Addis Ababa University. And there's a statue in front of the university. And if you look very closely, there's a small lion there. And someone didn't believe me, who lives in Addis Ababa. I had to drive him by there, but it's there. And but this is where a lot of unrest was, also around the university area. So beneath the lion's gaze is also this small lion that's there. But your second question, which is fantastic, is I divided the book into 4 sections. And if you notice when you're reading it, Hailu, my doctor, begins or ends each one of those sections. He's my main character. And you see through Hailu at each of those sections the slow disintegration of a human being under the pressure of war. I was really interested in survivors, in what remains after conflict. And you see through Hailu how someone survives, not fully whole like they were before, but still surviving. And so he's, for me, the marker in those, and the steps to both his resistance and also that slow wearing away.
Thank you. Well, my next question is focuses on the influences other writers have on you and your connection with diaspora African writers and your connection with writers and poets in Ethiopia and in Africa in general. If you could discuss that.
Yeah. The first question with diaspora writings, I read a lot, and I read everything that I can find, but I think for me, I remember being in college and picking up The 13th Son by Danyacha Warku and saying, wow, it was a wonderful book, and it was a wonderful, for me, he was writing about Ethiopia, about modernity, and this struggle of tradition with a modern Ethiopia. And I could see in that story my own negotiations with being a different kind of Ethiopian, but having family who are very traditional. And that book really spoke to me. Frantz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth, was really just, it opened my world in so many ways. And Ama Ata Aidu, who wrote Our Sister Killjoy, a writer out of Ghana, she was writing a book, but writing it and breaking structure. And I was reading this as a writer. It was just really incredible for me. So I keep reading it. Chris Abani, Akpan, Jam Kutsia, Marine Dai is a new writer out of France. I'm constantly reading these, but what I'm interested in when I'm reading these writers from the diaspora are ways that they negotiate being somewhere else while also being from a different place. And I'm interested in the types of stories that they are telling in that way, and hoping to learn, but also hoping to expand my own perspective. In terms of writers who are in Ethiopia right now, for me, I'm constantly looking for books that are written by young, up-and-coming writers who live in Ethiopia. And in fact, I'm working on an anthology right now. I'll work on it when my next book is done. They won't let me start until then. So, but I'm actively looking for writers who are in Ethiopia now and writing in Amharic. I'd like to be a small kind of bridge to bring their work here, to get it translated. And so that anthology, which will start, I think, in 2014, I'm already looking for writers, and I've found some really, really exciting work that's being done in Ethiopia, and it's wonderful.
Well, there is a brief question here as to your feelings, how you feel differently or more or less connected to American writers, how connected with them.
That's an interesting question, because I think I read based on interest, and so I'm looking for writers that are writing just not from the country they're in, but the subject matter that might interest me, or as a writer who is very interested in the technical aspects of writing, in the craft of writing, and how to write a novel, and how to work with structure and voice and tone, all those things that I have to think about when I write. I go to across the globe, but one of the most influential writers for me has been an American writer by the name of E.L. Doctorow. And he's written Ragtime, which I think is one of the most perfect books written. The Book of Daniel, it does some brave things with story and politics and again with structure that I have learned from, perhaps more from reading everything that he's written than some of my graduate courses.
Okay. Thank you, Maaza. Well, the next question is about the challenge of African diaspora writers.
Yeah.
You can start with your own experience and tell us a little bit more about the others.
I think one of the biggest challenges, one of the things that I hear when I am at literary festivals or I'm at readings and I'm around other writers who are born in different parts of Africa, we all get asked the question, are you an African writer? Do you think of yourself as an African writer? And I remember the first time I got asked this question, my book had just come out. I don't think it was out yet. I think it was coming out the next week. It was my first interview with a journalist. And we met somewhere in Brooklyn, and he asked me the first question, are you an African writer? And I was a little naive, I think, and I was so shocked by the question because I'm just me. I'm me when I'm writing. I'm not thinking of this is an African word, is this an American word, is this a Habesha word? I'm just writing. And so I didn't think about that, and I was shocked. I said, what do you mean by African? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know. He said, I thought you would know. I said, I don't know either. Just answer in English. So, it's just, and I think that's the struggle we face. And what you will see with writers who are continually put under this umbrella of African writer, we are seeing it now. You'll see the resistance. You'll see these writers saying, I'm not African. I'm not African. I'm a writer, or I'm American, or I'm French. And they're resisting that tag. And I think what our goal should be is not to say who is African or who is not, but to begin to broaden our definition of what is American, or what is French, or what is Italian, or what is German. Because that's the way that the world we are invading. We are changing those definitions. It's not, those definitions should not be changing who we are.
Great. Well, my last question is already answered.
Oh.
The books that you're going to write, any major literary work that's forthcoming,
Yeah.
if you could just give us some clue. We don't want you to discuss the whole book, but just...
Okay, so you know about the anthology, but before that, the project I've been working on now for about 2 years has been a new novel that's set in 1935, and it's about Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia and the war that came as a result of that. And I lived in Italy for a while, looking in the archives and interviewing the children and the grandchildren of these Italian soldiers, and I have been doing some extensive research on the Ethiopian side as well. My goal is to tell this story from both sides of the battle lines, because I'm very interested in the way that what I don't quite understand, and when I don't understand something, that's usually a good sign to write about it. What I don't understand is those Italians who eventually settled in Ethiopia and lived there, but they were shooting at the people they made into neighbors and married into. And that's for me a question that makes a book. How is that? What happened there? And so I'm working on that. But what's interesting to me also is the role of women in that war, and I don't think we have explored that enough. And I'm very excited about this. So some of my main characters are the women who were on the front lines with the men.
Well, Maaza, I should inform you that we have a rich collection of
I know I have to talk.
yes,
We're talking at lunch.
Italian archives. So you're welcome to have a look.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for the very enlightening interview
Thank you.
that you gave us. And I want to remind all of you that her books are being sold over there, and she can sign. And now we go to question and answer. I think there is a very enthusiastic question there.
Well, really, thank you so much. You're an amazing writer.
Thank you.
My question is, when you did the research and you found out, I mean, you covered so much on social, on families and all that. What did it do to our culture when you were tested in a situation like that? What happens? Because we all say we're Christians, we're community, we love each other and all that. And when you describe the brothers, how different it was. What did it do to the culture overall?
I think that's an interesting question. I feel like we're not done yet with what it's done. The fact that you and I are here in this country, we're still going through the consequences of that. What I think maybe a very simple answer that it did do was it tore families apart. And it forced secrets into families where before there were not, because there are things that are still very hard to speak about. That would, for me, be the most immediate consequence. My characters, and especially Dawit in my book, begins to question religion, begins to question why God is doing this, why are we praying, why don't we take action? And I wonder if those questions are also still continuing to surface in Ethiopia.
I also want to say thank you very much. This has been really enlightening. My question is, you have gone back historically for your first book and your next upcoming book. Do you have plans to write your story as an Ethiopian American living here and how that has affected you in your cultural perspective?
I don't know if there's anything new I could say, which is what stops me from, when I have a question is when I start writing, usually. And I feel like my life has gone the way that so many other immigrants that have gone. I'm very interested in the history of my family, and maybe I can connect myself to that continuum, but I'm not that interesting to myself. Not enough for a book. So I don't have plans yet. That's a good question.
Any more questions? Comments? Questions?
The other question is, I'm so really excited that you said you're gonna, interview women and find out about women. There isn't a lot written about Ethiopian women, which is really sad, and what they went through during the death and even the revolution. So how are you planning to do that and finding the women? Because most of them are not willing to talk also. I've tried in a small way, going back and trying to talk to the mothers, to the grandmothers, and they don't want to really open up that way. So how do you plan to do that?
I have been trying to find the stories by speaking to people, by asking, but it's been very hard. It's been very hard. Unfortunately, especially during the era that I'm researching now, 1935, so many of those women have passed away or they're old, and so maybe I'm looking for their children right now, and I'm finding just any information I can find online or through books. And so I'm constantly looking. If anyone knows something, I really am interested in these stories. I have found, living in Italy, I found an academic, a scholar, who was doing research on the era of these Eritrean women who were the madama of these Italian men. And she did some interviews with them. It was very difficult to get them to talk also, but I've read some of those and that's been eye-opening too. So little by little, it's coming.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
Very much. I was wondering if you are at all involved with the diaspora, Ethiopian diaspora here, in terms of political activity, trying to find a way forward in the current situation.
No. My main concern here is just it's really as a writer. It's really, I'm, because my parents are back in Ethiopia now, I'm always aware of what's happening. But I also understand that my role as a writer is it's really to write the books that I am. In terms of politics, it's very complicated. It gets so complicated and changes so much all the time. But I'm aware of what happens there, and my heart and my head is constantly there in Ethiopia. Oh, there's one.
Thanks again for the talk. Very interesting. And I'm that you're writing from personal experience, things that you can remember and so forth, and that you're interested in the impact in humanistic terms upon people. Can you give us a very quick sketch of what happens to Haile from the beginning, this well-adjusted doctor in his profession, position, and so forth? You can't read the whole book.
I've heard you have to read the book.
But can you tell us, though, what happens to him between the beginning and what's he like at the end?
I can say very briefly, and you will have to read the book because it's very complicated. But he's a changed man as a result of everything. In a very broad sense, my question in this book that I was exploring through Hailu is what remains. What is it that you have left after you go through everything? What do you now hold dear that you may have taken for granted before? And so Hailu is a different person, and I think his whole family is, but he's changed as a result. But you have to read. I think that's
Okay.
it. Okay.
Okay, thank you all of you for coming. Thank you, Maaza,
Thank you.
for that nice
That was
presentation.
great. Thank you.
And I urge you to buy her books. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.